Silent stone faces stare from forgotten jungles and deserts. We are surrounded by the ghosts of entire worlds that simply disappeared. Today we journey into the deepest shadows of our past to explore 20 ancient civilizations that vanished without a trace. By the end, you will understand the fragile threads that hold any society together. How could a people sophisticated enough to build perfect cities simply walk away from them forever? What force is powerful enough to erase not just a kingdom, but the very memory of how it lived? This is not just a tour of ruins. It is an investigation into human ambition, our relationship with the planet, and the haunting patterns that echo from their silence into our present. When you think of a lost civilization, what is the first mystery that captures your imagination? That silence is what truly sets these stories apart. We are not talking about the fall of Rome, with its well-documented political decay and barbarian invasions. We are discussing something far more unsettling, a complete cultural erasure. A people with their language, their art, their daily routines, their gods simply ceased to be. The stones they left behind whisper, but the voices are gone. To understand why, we must become detectives of the distant past, piecing together clues from 3 distinct fields of study. Archaeologists sift through the physical remains, the pottery shards and foundation stones. Climatologists read the ancient diaries of the Earth itself, trapped in ice cores and sediment layers, to see if the weather turned against a civilization. Anthropologists try to reconstruct the social fabric, asking if conflict from within unraveled what no outside force could break. The puzzle they are trying to solve is immense, and the possible culprits are as varied as they are devastating. A shift in monsoon patterns that turns fertile farmland to dust, the slow exhaustion of a critical resource like timber or fresh water, a social contract that fractures under the weight of inequality or dogma. Even events from the cosmos like a comet's passing or a prolonged solar minimum could have triggered a cascade of failure. But this investigation is far more than an academic exercise. Every vanished civilization is a stark, silent experiment in sustainability. They represent a test case of what happens when a society's demands outpace its environment's capacity, or when its internal bonds prove too fragile to withstand crisis. In their empty plazas and overgrown temples, we see a reflection of our own modern challenges, a timeless warning written not in words but in absence. The question their silence asks us is not simply what happened to them, but what we can learn before our own story is written in the same quiet stones. The very definition of vanishing is itself a puzzle. When we say a civilization disappeared without a trace, we are not suggesting every man, woman, and child simply evaporated into thin air. Human beings are survivors. The vanishing is far more subtle and in many ways more profound. It is the collapse of a complex societal identity. Think of it as a grand, intricate tapestry. The individual threads, the people, may still exist, but the pattern, the picture they once wove together, is lost forever. The language that gave their thought structure falls silent. The shared beliefs that guided their community dissolve. The specialized knowledge to build their aqueducts or chart their stars is forgotten. What remains are the monumental frames upon which that tapestry was hung, the stone cities and towering temples, now empty and waiting for a meaning they can no longer convey. This is the core of our mystery. We find the physical shell, but the spirit that animated it is gone. A successor culture may move into the abandoned cities, may even reuse the stones, but they do not sing the old songs or understand the original purpose. The written records, if they exist at all, become cryptic artifacts, a locked door with no key. In some cases, the people themselves may have dispersed, blending into neighboring groups over generations. their unique cultural fingerprint gradually fading until only the echo of their architecture remains. This distinction is crucial. We are not just looking for places where people stopped living. We are searching for places where a specific way of being human, a complete world of thought and tradition, came to an end and left no direct heir. The trace they left is not a historical chronicle, but a monumental question mark carved in stone, and it is that profound silence we are about to listen to as we encounter our first lost world. The first ghost we encounter is one of the most sophisticated and serene. In the vast floodplains of what is now Pakistan and northwest India, a civilization emerged with such quiet confidence it almost feels modern. This was the Indus Valley Civilization, sometimes called the Harappan culture, and its story begins over 5,000 years ago. What they built was not a collection of villages that grew haphazardly, but a network of meticulously planned cities, conceived as a whole from the very first brick. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are their most famous sites, and walking through their excavated streets is an experience that defies expectation. You find wide, straight avenues laid out in a precise grid, a level of urban planning Europe would not see again for thousands of years. You find houses connected to a city-wide drainage system, with individual bathrooms and waste chutes that emptied into covered sewers. You find standardized weights made of stone, evidence of a vast and regulated trade network that stretched from the mountains of Afghanistan to the coasts of Arabia. This was a society of remarkable order, cleanliness, and economic reach, flourishing for nearly 2,000 years, and then they simply walked away. By around 1300 before Common Era, the great urban centers were empty, the bustling streets fell silent, the meticulous drains clogged with dust. The civilization did not end in a dramatic, fiery collapse that leaves clear evidence for archaeologists. It seems to have simply unraveled. The great mystery is why. What could persuade an entire population to abandon such perfectly engineered homes? Researchers have proposed several quiet culprits. Perhaps the rivers that gave them life, the Indus and the Gagahakra, shifted their courses due to tectonic activity, slowly starving the agricultural heartland. Perhaps a prolonged and severe drought, a shift in monsoon patterns recorded in ancient climate data, made large-scale farming unsustainable. Maybe their intricate trade networks, the source of their wealth, fractured for reasons we cannot yet see, causing a slow economic decline that made city life impossible. The people likely did not vanish in an instant, but gradually dispersed into smaller, rural communities, their urban identity fading over generations. But the most profound layer of their silence is written. The Indus Valley people left behind thousands of inscriptions, short sequences of symbols on seals and pottery. It is a script, a true writing system, and to this day, no one in the modern world can read it. We have the dictionary, but we have lost the language. Their stories, their laws, their names for their gods, their own explanation for why they left, all of it is locked behind an unbroken cipher. Their world is a beautifully constructed room, but the door is sealed shut. We can admire the architecture, but we cannot hear the conversation inside. This makes their disappearance uniquely complete, a double vanishing of both people and voice. They remind us that a civilization can be incredibly advanced, orderly, and resilient, and still be vulnerable to the slow, patient pressures of a changing world. Their legacy is not one of conquest or spectacle, but of a quiet, orderly genius that ultimately retreated into the very landscape it once mastered, leaving behind a blueprint of a city and a riddle written in stone. From the silent, orderly streets of the Indus, we sail west to a civilization defined by color, motion, and a cataclysm from the deep. The world of the Minoans feels like a vivid dream of the ancient Mediterranean. Their capital was the palace of Knossos on Crete, a sprawling complex so intricate with its multi-story buildings, winding corridors, and advanced plumbing that it later inspired the Greek myth of the labyrinth. This was no dark, oppressive maze, but a vibrant center of art and power. The walls were alive with frescoes of leaping dolphins, graceful lilies, and most strikingly, young athletes vaulting over the backs of charging bulls in a ritual known as bull leaping. The Minoans were not fortress builders but master mariners. Their sleek ships dominated the Aegean Sea, creating a vast trade network that brought wealth, ideas, and a distinct cultural influence to the entire region. They lived in apparent peace for centuries, with no signs of defensive walls or major weapon caches, a rarity in the ancient world. Their society, it seems, was confident and secure, a brilliant flame burning brightly on its island home. Then the earth itself exploded. Around the year 1600 before Common Era, the volcanic island of Thera, modern Santorini, erupted in one of the largest geological events in human history. The scale is almost impossible to comprehend. The eruption was estimated to be many times more powerful than the one that destroyed Pompeii. It would have been heard across continents. A colossal column of ash and rock would have darkened the sky for days. Then came the tsunamis, walls of water racing across the sea to smash into the northern coasts of Crete, devastating ports, sweeping away fleets, and inundating fertile coastal plains with salt water and debris. For a civilization whose lifeblood was the sea, this was a direct blow to its heart. The immediate devastation must have been horrific, but here the mystery deepens. The Minoan Civilization did not vanish overnight. Archaeological evidence clearly shows that Knossos and other centers were repaired and reoccupied. Life continued, but something fundamental had broken. The trade networks that fueled their economy were shattered. The psychological blow of seeing their world literally shaken apart must have been profound. Their maritime dominance was crippled, leaving them vulnerable. In the following centuries, a new power from the Greek mainland, the Mycenaeans, began to grow in influence. Whether through gradual cultural absorption, political takeover, or a final, forgotten conflict, the elegant Minoan world slowly faded. Their unique artistic style gave way to Mycenaean motifs. Their mysterious written language, Linear A, used for administration and ritual, fell out of use and remains undeciphered to this day. The Minoans did not so much disappear as they were transformed, their vibrant identity dissolving into the culture of their successors. Their story is a haunting lesson in resilience meeting a force of nature. They survived the apocalypse, but they could not survive its long, slow aftermath. The volcano did not erase them in an instant, but it severed the vital connections that held their sophisticated world together, leaving them adrift in a changed sea until their own light was gradually dimmed and absorbed by the shadows of a new age. From the volcanic seas of the Mediterranean, we cross an ocean to the sweltering, vibrant cradle of the Americas. Deep in the tropical lowlands of what is now south-central Mexico, a culture emerged so foundational that scholars often call it the mother of Mesoamerican civilization. This was the world of the Olmec, flourishing from around 1500 before Common Era. Their influence is not measured in the size of an empire, but in the profound depth of their cultural inventions. They were the first in the region to build large ceremonial centers, complex societies with clear social stratification. They were master artists, carving exquisite figures from rare, blue-green jade with a skill that speaks of deep spiritual significance. Most iconic of all are the colossal stone heads, 17 of which have been discovered, each carved from a single basalt boulder, some weighing over 20 tons. These heads, with their distinctive helmet-like caps and solemn, powerful expressions, are believed to be portraits of individual rulers, a stunning display of both artistic ability and political authority. The Olmecs likely gave the Americas its earliest writing system, with glyphs found on artifacts that hint at a complex language. they also appear to have developed the basic concept of the sacred calendar that would later become central to Maya and Aztec life. They were, in essence, the innovators, the first to try out the ideas that would define an entire cultural sphere for millennia, and then they walked away from their own creations. Around 400 before Common Era, their great centers, San Lorenzo and later La Venta, were not merely abandoned, they were ceremonially decommissioned. Monuments were deliberately toppled, buried in long, orderly rows. Certain sculptures were mutilated, their faces carefully defaced. This was not the result of a sudden invasion or a hasty flight. It looks like a ritual termination, a conscious closing ceremony for a sacred space. Why would a people so deeply connected to their rulers and gods systematically dismantle their own heartlands? The theories are as mysterious as the act itself. Some researchers point to environmental pressures. The river courses that provided transport for those massive basalt boulders may have shifted, disrupting the economy and food supply. Evidence suggests periods of serious drought or volcanic activity that could have made the region inhospitable. Others propose internal social unrest, a revolt against a ruling class whose power was symbolized by those very stone heads. Perhaps the society fractured under its own weight, leading to a revolutionary rejection of the old order. The Olmec people did not biologically vanish. They almost certainly dispersed, their knowledge and bloodlines blending into the emerging cultures around them, like the Maya and the Zapotec. Their cultural DNA lived on, powerfully evident in the art, religion, and science of their successors. But their distinct political identity, their unique expression as the Olmecs, came to a deliberate and quiet end. Their legacy is one of profound paradox. They invented so much of what would come after, yet they chose to bury their own central symbols. They are both the clear beginning of a story and a mysterious, closed chapter within it. Their silent, buried heads ask us a difficult question. What does it mean for a civilization to succeed so brilliantly at creating a cultural template, only to decide that its own time as the primary user of that template is complete? The silent, buried heads of the Olmecs offer one kind of mystery, a deliberate closing. But some civilizations leave behind a monument so stunning, its very existence seems to defy their disappearance. This is the paradox of the Nabateans. Their capital was not just a city, it was a geological fantasy made real. Imagine approaching through a narrow, winding canyon called the Sick, walls of sheer rock towering hundreds of feet overhead, the sky a mere sliver of light above. Then the canyon opens and you are faced with the treasury Al-Khosne, a majestic temple facade carved directly into the face of a rose-red cliff glowing in the desert sun. This is Petra, and it was the beating heart of a kingdom built not on conquest but on control. From around the 4th century before Common Era, the Nabateans, an Arab people, mastered the harsh deserts of what is now Jordan. Their power came from the spice trade, a network of caravan routes carrying frankincense, myrrh, and precious goods from Arabia to the markets of the Mediterranean. Petra was the ultimate oasis, not because of natural springs, but because of breathtaking ingenuity. In a land defined by scarcity, the Nabateans became hydrological engineers. They carved intricate systems of channels, dams, and cisterns into the rock itself, capturing every precious drop of seasonal rainwater. They turned a desert wadi into a lush, defensible metropolis capable of supporting tens of thousands. Their wealth allowed them to sculpt their gods and their tombs directly into the mountains, creating a city that was both a fortress and a masterpiece. Their disappearance, however, was not a dramatic collapse. It was a slow fade orchestrated by the changing currents of global commerce. In the year 106 of the Common Era, the Roman Empire formally annexed the Nabatean kingdom, absorbing it as the province of Arabia Petraea. This brought stability, but it also began to dilute their political independence. More critically, the Romans increasingly favored sea routes for trade. Slowly, the caravans that were Petra's lifeblood began to diminish. The wealth that funded the carving of new tombs and temples gradually dried up over the following centuries. As the Roman Empire transformed into the Byzantine Empire, the Nabateans assimilated. Their unique script, derived from Aramaic, fell out of daily use. Their distinct religious practices blended with the rising tide of Christianity and later Islam. The people did not vanish, they simply became part of the larger tapestry of the region, their identity woven into new cultural patterns. Petra itself was gradually abandoned, its sophisticated water systems falling into silence. By the time of the Crusades, it was a memory, a legend whispered among Bedouin tribes. For the Western world, it was utterly lost until the early 19th century. So the Nabateans present a different kind of vanishing. They were not erased by catastrophe, but made obsolete by progress. Their story is a testament to how a civilization can be brilliantly adapted to its specific moment, yet vulnerable to a world that simply decides to move on. Petra stands not as a tomb for a dead people, but as a monument to a culture that chose to evolve, leaving its most spectacular chapter to be reclaimed by the desert and the sands of time, waiting for a world ready to be astonished by it once more. But a kingdom can also vanish by turning inward, its light not extinguished but refocused. High on the windswept plateaus of northern Ethiopia, the Kingdom of Axum once stood as a giant. From roughly the 1st to the 8th century of the Common Era, it was one of the four great powers of the ancient world, a peer to Rome, Persia, and China. Its merchants commanded the trade routes between the Mediterranean and India, its sleek ships sailing the Red Sea. It minted its own beautiful gold, silver, and copper coins, a statement of economic confidence that carried the image of its rulers and the cross of its faith across the known world. Most visibly, they were builders of breathtaking scale, carving and erecting monumental stone obelisks or stelae, some over 100 feet tall, as grave markers for their elite. These single pieces of granite, intricately carved to resemble multi-story buildings, still pierce the sky today, silent sentinels of a lost ambition. Axum was also an early and fervent adopter of Christianity, making it a unique spiritual crossroads. So what happened to this powerful, sophisticated empire? Its decline is a masterclass in the slow, interlocking pressures that can unravel a civilization. The first thread to fray was the very land they relied upon. Centuries of intensive agriculture to feed a growing population and massive construction projects that consumed vast forests led to severe environmental degradation. The soil became exhausted, erosion set in, and the landscape that supported their wealth began to turn against them. Then the world changed around them. The rapid rise and expansion of the Islamic caliphates in the 7th and 8th centuries fundamentally redrew the map of global trade. The new Islamic empires controlled the routes to the north and east, gradually shifting commerce away from the Red Sea corridor that had been Axum's lifeline. Isolated from its economic networks and struggling with a diminished agricultural base, the empire's power quietly ebbed. But here is where the Axumite story differs from a true disappearance. The people did not vanish and their culture did not die. Instead, the political heart of the kingdom retreated southward, inland into the more defensible Ethiopian highlands. The grand international project ceased, the minting of coins stopped, and the obelisks were left standing alone. The centralized imperial authority waned, giving way to a new chapter. What remained and flourished was their profound cultural and religious legacy. The Christian faith they embraced became the bedrock of Ethiopian identity. Their jazz language evolved into the liturgical tongue of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The very lineage of their rulers, according to tradition, stretched back to the biblical Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, forming the core of a national saga that would sustain the Ethiopian state for centuries. So Axum did not so much vanish as it underwent a profound metamorphosis. Its imperial shell dissolved, but its soul migrated and took root in a new form. The vanishing is one of political structure and global prominence, not of people or spirit. It is a powerful reminder that a civilization's end is not always a full stop. Sometimes it is merely a semicolon, a pause before the story continues in a different yet deeply connected voice. The obelisks still stand, not as tombstones, but as mile markers on a much longer journey. A civilization can be defined by its relationship with the sky. For the ancestral Puebloans, who once flourished in the high desert of the American Southwest, the heavens were a clock, a calendar, and a covenant. They built their world in places that seem almost defiantly improbable, carving entire cities into the sheer faces of cliffs at places like Mesa Verde around 1200 Common Era. These were not simple hideouts, but sophisticated multi-story apartments with hundreds of rooms, kivas for ceremonial gatherings, and intricate masonry that fit together without mortar. Their genius was an adaptation to scarcity. They were masters of dry land farming, coaxing corn, beans, and squash from the dusty soil using check dams and terraces to capture every drop of precious water. They watched the sun and stars with precise knowledge, aligning their buildings to mark the solstices, ensuring their agricultural and ritual cycles were in harmony with the cosmos. Their society was a testament to human resilience in a beautiful but unforgiving land. Then, within the span of a few generations, they walked away from it all. By the late 1300s, the great cliff dwellings stood silent, empty of everything but the wind. This was not a sudden evacuation, but a gradual, generation-by-generation departure, a slow unraveling of a way of life. Researchers have pieced together a perfect storm of pressures that made these stone cities untenable. The primary culprit appears etched into the region's ancient trees. Tree ring data reveals a catastrophic, decades-long megadrought that gripped the Southwest in the late 1300s. Springs dried up, crops failed year after year, and the careful balance of their agriculture shattered. This environmental crisis likely intensified other strains. Centuries of intensive farming and gathering of firewood may have depleted the already fragile landscape around their population centers. As resources dwindled, the social fabric, woven tightly in those communal cliff dwellings, may have frayed. Evidence suggests periods of conflict, not necessarily with outside invaders, but possibly internal tensions rising from hardship. The difficult decision to leave was likely a strategic migration, not a panicked flight. The people moved south and east, dispersing into smaller groups across a wider landscape. They did not vanish. Their cultural and genetic lineage flows directly into the modern Pueblo peoples, such as the Hopi and the Zuni, who maintain deep ancestral connections to those cliffside sites. What ended was not the people, but a specific, concentrated chapter of their story, the grand experiment of building vast, complex communities in the canyon walls. Their legacy is a profound lesson in adaptation. When the environment shifted beyond their capacity to engineer solutions, they chose a different kind of resilience. They traded monumental architecture for mobility, preserving their core culture by integrating it into new communities. The silent cliff dwellings are not tombstones, but waypoints in an unbroken journey, reminding us that sometimes the ultimate act of a civilization's survival is knowing when to transform and what essential parts of itself to carry forward into an uncertain future. Even the grandest of human endeavors can be swallowed by the green. The Temple of Angkor Wat is a vision of cosmic order carved in sandstone, its 5 iconic towers representing the peaks of Mount Meru, the home of the gods in Hindu belief. It is the breathtaking legacy of the Khmer Empire, a civilization that ruled much of Southeast Asia for over 600 years, from the 9th to the 15th century. At its zenith, the capital city of Angkor was a sprawling metropolis, a vast network of temples, palaces, reservoirs, and canals that supported a population of perhaps 1 million people, making it the largest pre-industrial city on Earth. This was not just a collection of buildings, it was a deliberate recreation of the Hindu universe on Earth, a statement of divine kingship and absolute power. The empire's wealth flowed from immense rice harvests, made possible by a hydraulic masterpiece, a complex system of giant reservoirs called barrays and canals that captured monsoon rains for year-round irrigation. This engineering allowed them to feed the massive population and labor force that built these stone mountains. Yet, by the 15th century, the imperial court had abandoned Angkor, moving its capital south, and the great city was slowly consumed by the relentless jungle. Its disappearance as a political center was not a sudden conquest, but a slow unraveling woven from several threads. A profound religious shift played a key role. Over time, the state religion transitioned from Hinduism, which emphasized the god-king and monumental temple building as acts of royal duty, to Theravada Buddhism, a more personal, monastic faith that required less grandiose royal patronage. This change in spiritual focus meant kings were no longer compelled to outdo their ancestors with ever larger construction projects, redirecting resources and attention. External pressures also mounted, particularly from the rising Kingdom of Ayutthaya to the west, which launched repeated military campaigns that sapped Khmer's strength and disrupted trade. But the most decisive factor may have been hiding beneath the jungle canopy all along. Recent archaeological surveys using LiDAR technology, which can see through dense vegetation, have revealed the staggering true scale of Angkor's water management network. It was far more extensive and complex than anyone imagined. Researchers now believe this very system, the source of the empire's wealth, may have ultimately contributed to its decline. The constant expansion and modification of canals and reservoirs to support a growing population likely led to severe ecological consequences. Deforestation for agriculture and construction would have caused increased erosion, silting up the crucial canals. The intricate balance of the water system may have become unstable, leading to periods of devastating flood or, conversely, crippling drought that the engineered landscape could no longer buffer. The civilization's greatest achievement may have slowly undermined its own foundation. The Khmer people did not vanish. Their culture and descendants are the heart of modern Cambodia. But the imperial project, the specific political and economic engine that built Angkor, could not be sustained. The jungle did not conquer a dead city. It patiently reclaimed a living one that had simply chosen and been forced to move on. The silent stones of Angkor Wat now stand as a monument to a profound question. How do you know when the very systems that enable your greatness have become too complex to manage? And when is the wisest course not to fight for a fading glory, but to carry your legacy forward in a new form? The faces staring back from Moche pottery are unnervingly alive. From the north coast of ancient Peru, between 100 and 700 of the Common Era, this civilization mastered the art of capturing human expression in clay. They created portrait vessels so detailed and individual that scholars believe they represent specific people, perhaps rulers or revered ancestors, each with unique hairstyles, ornaments, and even carefully rendered scars or signs of illness. This was a society of profound artistry and technical skill, equally adept at working gold into intricate ceremonial ornaments and building monumental adobe pyramids like the Huaca del Sol, which once contained over 140 million sun-dried bricks. Their world was rich, complex, and deeply connected to the forces of nature, which they depicted in stunning murals and metalwork, and then their world shattered. Unlike a slow fade, the Moche collapse feels abrupt, as if a vibrant conversation was cut off mid-sentence. The archaeological record reveals a terrifying sequence. First came a prolonged megadrought, a period of decades where the life-giving rains simply failed. This would have strained their sophisticated irrigation systems to the breaking point, causing crop failures and social stress. Then, with cruel irony, the climate swung violently in the opposite direction. A series of extreme El Niño events, the periodic warming of Pacific waters unleashed torrential rains onto the parched landscape. These were not gentle showers, but catastrophic downpours that would have triggered devastating floods and mudslides, sweeping away canals, fields, and entire settlements. The very infrastructure that sustained their civilization was wiped out in a series of climatic hammer blows. It is easy to picture the aftermath, the giant adobe pyramids, their brickwork melting like sandcastles under the relentless deluge. The societal trauma must have been unimaginable. In the face of such ruin, faith in the old gods and the rulers who interceded with them likely collapsed as well. Evidence at some sites suggests periods of conflict or unrest, possibly a final, desperate unraveling of the social order. The great ceremonial centers were abandoned, their artistic traditions ceasing abruptly. Yet, as with so many of these stories, the end was not absolute. The Moche people, their knowledge, and their artistic sensibilities did not vanish from the earth. They dispersed, and their legacy flowed into the cultures that followed, most notably the Chimu Empire, which would later build its own great city of Chan Chan nearby. The Moche remind us that a civilization can be both brilliant and breathtakingly fragile. Their story is a stark lesson in climatic extremes, a 1-2 punch of scarcity and drowning excess that no society, no matter how artistically gifted or well-organized, could easily withstand. Their hauntingly realistic portraits now serve as a memorial to a people who captured the human face with perfect clarity, but whose own fate was ultimately written by the indifferent and overwhelming face of the sky and the sea. Their haunting portraits remind us that even beauty is no shield against the sky's indifference. But what about a culture that chose to set its own world on fire, not once, but again and again? In the fertile lands of what is now Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine, a Neolithic society performed a breathtaking act of controlled creation and destruction. The Cucuteni Trypillia culture, flourishing between 5,500 and 2,750 before Common Era, constructed some of the largest human settlements on Earth at the time. Their towns were not mere clusters of huts, but planned communities with rows of large, 2-story houses, sometimes housing thousands of people. These were vast, bustling places for their era, centers of sophisticated pottery and agriculture. And then, with a regularity that still baffles researchers, they would burn it all down. Every 60 to 80 years, entire settlements were deliberately set ablaze in what appears to be a coordinated ritual act. The ground beneath these sites is layered with thick, uniform strata of ash and charcoal, a testament to cycles of construction, conflagration, and rebirth. Why would a people invest such immense labor into building a complex town, only to willingly reduce it to ashes? The reasons are one of prehistory's most captivating puzzles. Some scholars propose a practical explanation that burning was a form of large-scale sanitation, cleansing the settlement of pests, disease, and accumulated waste before rebuilding on a fresh, clean foundation. Others see a profound spiritual purpose. The act could have been a ritual of renewal, a symbolic death and rebirth of the community itself, severing ties with the old cycle and allowing a purified society to emerge from the ashes. The fire may have been an offering to deities of the earth or the hearth, ensuring fertility and continuity for the generations to come. This practice speaks of a society deeply in tune with cyclical time, viewing their own existence as part of a larger, repeating pattern of decay and regeneration. Their ultimate disappearance, however, was not a choice. Around the late 4th millennium before Common Era, the rhythm of their world was disrupted by forces beyond their control. Climatic shifts may have altered their agricultural patterns, creating stress. More significantly, they faced the gradual migration of new peoples from the steppes to the east, such as the Yamnaya culture, often associated with the spread of Indo-European languages. These groups had different technologies, including wheeled vehicles and perhaps new social structures. The encounter was likely not a single violent invasion, but a long, slow process of cultural interaction, pressure, and integration over centuries. The distinct Cucuteni Trypillia way of life, with its massive settlements and ritual burning, gradually faded. They did not vanish in a literal sense. Their people, their knowledge, and their genetic legacy almost certainly blended into the fabric of the emerging European cultures that followed. What they left behind are not ruined cities, but ghost towns defined by their ashes, and thousands of enigmatic clay figurines, often depicting stylized female forms, whose silent meanings are as buried as the settlements themselves. Their story is a powerful meditation on the idea of renewal. They built their civilization on the understanding that everything has a season, and that sometimes the most profound act of continuity is to consciously let go of what you have built, trusting that the next foundation will rise from the wisdom left in the embers. The deliberate fires of the Cucuteni Trypillia speak of a culture in rhythm with cycles of renewal, but some disappearances feel less like a ritual and more like a sudden, chilling silence. In the vast, open landscapes of ancient North America, a different kind of hunter once walked, their signature etched not in ash but in stone. These were the people of the Clovis culture, and for a brief, brilliant window of time roughly 13,000 years ago, they were the pioneers of a continent. We know them almost entirely by a single, breathtaking innovation, the Clovis point. These were not crude stone flakes, but elegant, leaf-shaped spear points with a distinctive groove or flute carved out of the base. This fluting was a stroke of technological genius, allowing the point to be securely hafted to a wooden spear shaft, creating a weapon of formidable power and precision. With these tools in hand, the Clovis people became masters of a world we can scarcely imagine, a North America populated by megafauna, giant creatures like mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths. They were the ultimate specialists, their lives and culture seemingly built around the pursuit of these majestic animals. And then, in what seems like a geological heartbeat, both the hunters and their gigantic prey vanish from the story. Around 12,800 years ago, the elegant fluted points stop appearing in the archaeological record. The mammoth bones, once found alongside campfires and tool-making sites, are no longer associated with human activity. It is as if a curtain fell on an entire act of human history in the Americas. The question of what happened is one of the most heated debates in archaeology. One prominent and controversial theory points to the heavens. Some researchers propose that a fragmented comet or asteroid exploded in the atmosphere over North America, a cataclysmic airburst that would have rained fire across the continent. This event, they suggest, triggered the Younger Dryas period, a sudden and dramatic return to Ice Age conditions that lasted for over 1,000 years. The hypothesis paints a picture of instant ecological chaos with continent-wide wildfires, a rapidly cooling climate, and the collapse of the very ecosystems that supported both the megafauna and the humans who hunted them. Other scientists point to more earthly explanations. Perhaps the Clovis people, for all their skill, practiced overhunting, and their specialized way of life could not adapt when their primary food sources dwindled. Or maybe the shifting climate at the end of the last ice age, even without a cosmic impact, altered the landscape and vegetation in ways the megafauna could not survive, and the Clovis culture, inextricably linked to them, faded as a result. What is undeniable is the abrupt transition. The Clovis culture, with its singular, beautiful technology, disappears, but humanity did not. In its place, a rich diversity of new archaeological traditions emerges across the continents, different styles of tool-making and adaptation. This suggests the people themselves likely survived, but their unifying cultural identity, their specific way of being in the world as mammoth hunters, did not. Their vanishing is a profound lesson in specialization. A culture perfectly adapted to one world can become extraordinarily vulnerable when that world changes, whether the change comes from the slow turn of the climate or just possibly a single fiery day from the sky. The Clovis Point, lying silent in the soil, is a monument to both human ingenuity and fragility, a reminder that even the most successful pioneers walk a narrow path between mastery and extinction. Their elegant spear points lie buried, a technology lost to a changing world, but another collapse was brewing across the sea, one that would echo through poetry for millennia. The age of the Mycenaeans was the stuff of legend, the historical bedrock for Homer's tales of the Trojan War and the wandering Odysseus. From around 1600 to 1100 before Common Era, these Greeks did not live in scattered villages. They built imposing, fortified palace complexes atop hills, like the mighty citadel of Mycenae with its famous Lion Gate, a statement of power carved in stone. These were centers of administration, trade, and military might, ruled by a warrior aristocracy. We know they kept meticulous records, using a script called Linear B to inventory chariots, textiles, and offerings to the gods on clay tablets. This was a complex, organized, and wealthy society, deeply connected to a vibrant network of trade that stretched across the eastern Mediterranean. Then, almost in unison, the lights went out. Around 1200 before Common Era, a wave of catastrophic destruction swept the region in what historians call the Bronze Age collapse. Palace after palace, from Mycenae to Pylos, was violently burned and abandoned. The administrative system shattered, and the knowledge of Linear B writing vanished entirely for centuries. The intricate international trade networks disintegrated, plunging the entire region into a period often called a Greek Dark Age, where political complexity, architectural ambition, and even literacy seemed to fall away. What could possibly cause such a widespread and synchronized downfall? The answer is not a single villain, but a perfect storm of disasters. Evidence points to a period of severe drought and famine, which would have strained agricultural systems and sparked social unrest. Geological records suggest a possible increase in seismic activity, earthquakes that could have toppled walls and shaken faith in the stability of the ruling order. This internal vulnerability was then met with external chaos. Contemporary Egyptian and Hittite records speak in panic of mysterious invaders they called the Sea Peoples, marauding groups who attacked coastal cities and disrupted trade routes. Whether these Sea Peoples were a cause or a symptom of the wider collapse is still debated, but their appearance coincides with the general unraveling. It is likely that internal rebellion, fueled by hardship and a loss of legitimacy by the palace elites, combined with these external raids to create an unstoppable tide. The centralized palace economies could not withstand the compounded pressure. The Mycenaean people did not disappear, but their civilization did. They retreated into smaller, simpler, and more isolated communities. The art of writing was forgotten, leaving only the oral tradition of epic poetry to preserve a hazy memory of their heroic age. Their story is a sobering lesson in systemic fragility. It shows how a highly interconnected civilization, for all its strength, can become vulnerable when multiple stressors, environmental, economic, and social, converge. The Lion Gate still stands, a silent sentinel over a landscape that once thrummed with power, reminding us that even the most legendary ages can end not with a single blow, but with the slow, relentless tightening of a knot woven from many different strands. Their Lion Gate stands as a monument to a collapse woven from many strands, but perhaps no vanished world has been so powerfully simplified into a single, stark warning. A tiny, isolated triangle of land in the vast South Pacific, Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, is home to one of humanity's most haunting and iconic achievements. Nearly 900 massive stone figures, the moai, stand with their backs to the sea, their solemn gaze turned inward across the island. These were not just sculptures, they were sacred vessels believed to hold the living essence, the mana, of deified ancestors watching over their descendant communities. Creating and transporting these multi-ton giants across miles of rugged terrain was an act of profound faith and staggering communal effort, a testament to a complex and spiritually rich society that thrived in profound isolation for centuries. For a long time, the dominant story of their end was a parable of self-destruction. It was said the Rapa Nui people, in their fervor to erect ever more and larger moai, completely deforested their island. Without trees, the soil eroded, crippling agriculture. Without large timber, they could no longer build the seagoing canoes vital for fishing and trade. This ecological catastrophe, the story goes, plunged society into a desperate tailspin of resource wars, toppled statues, and even survival practices that modern narratives have often sensationalized. It became the ultimate cautionary tale, a microcosm of a planet overshooting its limits, but recent archaeology tells a more nuanced and in some ways more tragic story. The island's environment did change dramatically, and the palm forests that once covered it were indeed lost. However, the process appears to have been more gradual, and the people more resilient and adaptive than the old collapse narrative allows. Evidence suggests they shifted to innovative rock gardening techniques to protect soil and grow crops, and they maintained a stable population for generations even after the forests were gone. The classical statue-building tradition did cease and societal structures changed, but this may have been a cultural evolution, not a sudden collapse. The final, irrevocable blow came from the outside world. With the arrival of European explorers in the 18th century, the isolated Rapa Nui were exposed to forces they could not possibly withstand. Slave raids from South America in the 19th century carried off a devastating portion of the population. Old world diseases to which they had no immunity swept through the community. These external shocks, compounded by the introduction of new livestock that further altered the fragile landscape, shattered what remained of the traditional social order. The people themselves, crucially, did not vanish. Their descendants live on Rapa Nui today, working to preserve and revive their language and traditions. What ended was a specific chapter, the classical civilization centered on the awe-inspiring ritual of the moai. Their true story is not a simple fable of ecological suicide, but a layered lesson in resilience meeting an overwhelming external storm. The silent moai now ask us a more complicated question. How do we distinguish between the natural evolution of a culture and its catastrophic end? And when does a world not fall from within, but is finally broken by a tide it never saw coming? Their silent moai hold a warning about isolation and external shock. Yet a civilization can also be undone by something as fundamental and quiet as a lake slowly retreating. High in the Andes, on the starkly beautiful Altiplano surrounding Lake Titicaca, the Tiwanaku Empire once stood as a beacon of ingenuity. From around 500 to 1000 of the Common Era, this was the dominant power in the region, a sophisticated culture whose influence stretched across parts of modern Bolivia, Peru, and Chile. Their capital city, Tiwanaku, was a marvel of stone and sky. They built monumental structures like the Acapana Pyramid and the Kalasasaya Temple Complex, assembling massive sandstone and andesite blocks with such precision that they fit together without mortar, a technique that would later amaze the Incas. But their true genius was not just in their architecture, it was in their partnership with a harsh environment. At an altitude of over 12,000 feet, where frost is a constant threat, they engineered a revolutionary agricultural system called raised fields. These were long, rectangular planting platforms surrounded by canals of water from Lake Titicaca. The water in the canals absorbed sunlight during the day, releasing heat at night to protect crops from freezing. The system was incredibly productive, turning the marshy lakeshore into a fertile breadbasket capable of supporting a large urban population and a far-reaching state. This was a civilization built on hydrological harmony, a perfect balance between human need and the lake's gift. Then the balance broke. Around the year 1000, a prolonged and severe drought began to grip the region. It was not a few dry years, but a climatic shift that lasted for centuries. The level of Lake Titicaca dropped dramatically, perhaps by dozens of feet. Those life-giving canals that fed the raised fields began to run dry. The protective microclimate the system created collapsed. The empire's entire agricultural foundation, the source of its wealth and power, slowly crumbled as the fields became barren. Without its food surplus, the centralized state could no longer sustain its population or its authority. There was no dramatic invasion, no single cataclysm. The collapse was a slow, relentless draining. As the state's power waned, the social and religious structures that held it together likely weakened as well. People made the difficult, practical choice to survive. They began to migrate away from the great capital, dispersing into smaller, more scattered communities in lower, wetter valleys where subsistence farming was still possible. The grand city of Tiwanaku was gradually abandoned, its precise ceremonial role and the complex meanings behind its iconic gateway of the sun and stern stone figures becoming mysteries even to the Incas who arrived centuries later and regarded the site with awe. The Tiwanaku people did not vanish. Their cultural and genetic legacy lived on in the Aymara and other Andean peoples. But their political project, their specific empire of stone and raised fields, came to a quiet end. Their story is a profound lesson in environmental dependency. It shows that a civilization can master its world with breathtaking intelligence, creating systems of abundance from apparent scarcity. But when the fundamental resource that system is built upon, in this case, the stable level of a vast lake slowly withdraws, even the greatest engineering cannot compensate. They remind us that our most brilliant adaptations are still a conversation with the planet, and sometimes the other side of that conversation simply falls silent. The retreat of a lake can silently unravel an empire of stone, but a civilization can also rise from the very earth itself, only to return to it just as quietly. Across the vast woodlands of eastern North America, a different kind of monument once defined the landscape. This was the world of the Mississippian culture, a society that flourished from around 800 to 1500 of the Common Era. They were not city builders in the stone and mortar sense, but masters of earth and community. Their power centers were not palaces, but enormous, flat-topped earthen mounds arranged around grand plazas. These were sacred stages for the rituals of a highly stratified society, platforms for the temples and homes of a spiritual and political elite who ruled over complex chiefdoms. And at the heart of it all was a place that would have stunned any contemporary European visitor, near the confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, where modern St. Louis now stands. The city of Cahokia once thrived. At its peak around 1100, it was a bustling metropolis of perhaps 20,000 people, a population larger than London at the same moment in history. Its skyline was dominated by over 120 mounds, with the colossal Monk's Mound at its core, a terraced earthen pyramid covering nearly 15 acres and rising 100 feet into the air. The great plaza at its foot could have held tens of thousands for ceremonies that aligned with the sun and stars, a testament to a sophisticated understanding of astronomy and social organization. This was the pinnacle of a cultural horizon that stretched across the river valleys of the continent. Then, centuries before sustained European contact, the heartbeat at Cahokia began to slow. By the 1400s, the Grand Plaza lay quiet. The thatched roof temples atop the mounds had decayed. The intricate network of trade that brought seashells from the Gulf and copper from the Great Lakes had diminished. The people had dispersed, leaving the silent mounds to the elements. Why would a society abandon such a monumental investment of labor and belief? The reasons, as always, point to a convergence of pressures. Supporting such a dense urban population in a pre-industrial world placed immense strain on the local environment. Centuries of harvesting timber for construction, fuel, and fortification likely led to significant deforestation, which in turn could have caused soil erosion and affected local game. A large, concentrated population is also vulnerable to shifts in climate. A series of droughts or floods could have disrupted the crucial maize agriculture that fed the city. There is also archaeological evidence of a wooden stockade built and rebuilt around the central precinct, suggesting periods of social tension or conflict, perhaps as resources grew strained or authority was challenged. The great chiefdoms were likely fragile alliances, and their cohesion may have simply fractured under internal stress, but the story does not end there. When Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto journeyed through the southeast in the 1540s, he encountered descendant Mississippian societies, though they were already shadows of what Cahokia had been. The final, invisible blow had already been struck. Old-world diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, spreading inland from early coastal contacts ahead of the explorers themselves, swept through populations with no immunity. These microbial shocks delivered a catastrophic demographic collapse that fragmented the remaining social structures beyond recovery. What European chroniclers later described as a pristine wilderness was in fact a landscape recently and profoundly emptied. The Mississippian people did not vanish. Their descendants are among the many Native American nations of the Southeast, but their unique cultural expression, that specific horizon of mound building, complex chiefdoms, and grand plazas, dissolved. The mounds themselves, like Monk's Mound, remain the largest ancient earthen construction north of Mexico. They stand not as ruins in the classical sense, but as quiet, grass-covered reminders of a lost equilibrium. They ask us to consider how a civilization built on the careful movement of Earth could be undone by the slower, unseen erosion of its environmental and social foundations, and finally, by a storm of germs from a world it never knew existed. South of the storied pharaohs, another sun rose over the Nile. The Kingdom of Kush, rooted in the land of Nubia, was not merely Egypt's neighbor, but its rival, its student, and at times its conqueror. For centuries, they existed in the shadow of their powerful northern neighbor, absorbing Egyptian gods, art, and architectural styles. But Kush was no mere copy. Around 750 before Common Era, in a stunning reversal of power, Kushite kings marched north and seized control of Egypt itself, establishing the 25th dynasty. For nearly a century, black pharaohs ruled the two lands, restoring traditional Egyptian art and religion. This was the zenith of Kushite ambition, proving they could not only emulate an empire but command it. When Assyrian armies eventually pushed them back up the river, they retreated to their heartland, but they did not fade. They reinvented themselves, shifting their capital first to Napata and later to the great city of Meroe. They cultivated a distinct identity. They built their own steep-sided, elegant pyramids, hundreds of which still stand in silent clusters in the desert. They developed their own written language, Meroitic, a script that covered royal monuments and temple walls. And here lies a profound silence, because while we can sound out the letters, the meaning of most Meroitic texts remains locked away, a direct conversation with the past we cannot yet hear. Their decline was a slow untangling, pulled by forces from without and within. To the north, the rising power of the Roman Empire clashed with Kush, leading to conflicts that drained resources. To the east, the growing influence of the Axumite kingdom began to challenge their trade networks and regional dominance, but perhaps the most decisive factor was the land itself. The capital of Meroe was a hub of industry famed for its iron production. This required immense amounts of charcoal, leading to widespread deforestation. Combined with overgrazing by livestock, the delicate ecology around the city began to fail. The soil eroded and the desert slowly crept in. This was not a sudden catastrophe, but a creeping exhaustion, a case of a civilization gradually consuming the very environmental foundation it stood upon. As the central authority weakened from economic and environmental strain, the unified kingdom fragmented into smaller, regional states. The Nubian people and their rich culture persisted, of course, adapting and continuing for centuries, even forming Christian kingdoms later on. But the specific political entity, the unified Kingdom of Kush with its own pyramids and its own undeciphered script, ceased to be. Its monumental legacy was gradually buried by the very sands that advanced as the trees fell, a quiet reminder that even the most resilient societies must live in balance with the world that sustains them, or risk becoming a monument to their own consumption. The silent consumption of a kingdom can be a slow, quiet process, but a civilization can also be defined by the sacred nature of its connections. In the shimmering heat of the Persian Gulf, a land existed more in legend than in memory. To the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia, Dilmun was not just a trading partner, it was a mythical paradise, a pure and holy land described in their epic poetry as a place free from sickness, sorrow, and death, where fresh waters mingled with the salt sea. This was no mere fantasy, however. Dilmun was a very real civilization, a vital maritime hub that flourished for over 2,000 years, likely centered on the islands of Bahrain and the eastern coast of Arabia. From around 3000 to 500 before Common Era, its merchants were the essential middlemen of the ancient world. Their sleek ships bridged two colossal civilizations, carrying the copper of Oman to the city-states of Mesopotamia and returning with grains, textiles, and timber, while also forging links eastward to the distant, sophisticated cities of the Indus Valley. Dilmun was the lubricant in the engine of Bronze Age trade, a place where cultures and commodities met, and its wealth was built on this sacred trust of exchange. The proof of their prosperity is etched into the landscape of Bahrain itself, in the form of tens of thousands of low, rounded burial mounds that blanket the island, one of the largest prehistoric cemeteries on Earth. These were not the tombs of a transient people, but of a stable, affluent society that honored its ancestors across generations. Yet, despite this enduring physical mark, Dilmun itself gradually faded from history. Its decline was not marked by invasion or natural disaster, but by a slow, inexorable shift in the currents of commerce. The civilization's fate was deeply tied to the fortunes of its two greatest partners. As the mighty Indus Valley civilization entered its period of decline and dispersal, one end of Dilmun's crucial trade network began to unravel. Then, as Mesopotamian powers like Babylon and Assyria experienced their own periods of weakness and political fragmentation, demand from the West became less stable. The world was also changing around them. New maritime routes and emerging powers in the region began to bypass the old Gulf pathways. Gradually, the economic reason for Dilmun's unique existence simply evaporated. Without its central role as the indispensable connector, its distinct cultural identity began to dissolve. The people did not vanish, but they were gradually absorbed into the sphere of larger, succeeding empires, first the Persians and later others. Their unique identity blurred, their specific role forgotten, until all that remained were those countless silent mounds and their glowing reputation in Sumerian myths. Dilmun presents a profound kind of vanishing, one of irrelevance. It reminds us that a civilization can be utterly central to its world, revered and prosperous, yet remain entirely dependent on the continued vitality of the networks it serves. When those networks change or fall silent, even a paradise can quietly cease to be a kingdom, its memory preserved only in the poetry of others and the quiet, earthen monuments of its dead. Paradise can fade when the currents of commerce shift, but some civilizations are born from a partnership with the sea so intimate it defines their entire world. Long before the Inca or even the Moche, along a narrow strip of desert between the Andes and the Pacific in Peru, a society emerged that rewrites the story of human complexity. The North Chico, also called the Carol Soup Civilization, began its quiet experiment in urban living over 5,000 years ago. That makes it the oldest known civilization in all of the Americas, a contemporary of the pyramids of Egypt and the great cities of Mesopotamia. What they built, however, was utterly unique. Their centers, like the sacred city of Carol, were not fortresses or dense warrens of homes. They were spacious arrangements of monumental platform mounds, grand plazas, and sunken circular courts, all oriented with precise astronomical alignments. These were places of ceremony, governance, and community gathering, built with a breathtaking scale that speaks of a highly organized society. Yet, walking through these ruins, archaeologists noted something profoundly strange and absent. There is no pottery, no intricate murals or carved statues. The visual art that screams of identity in so many ancient cultures is simply not here. Their genius expressed itself in other ways, in the architecture of space and sound, with musical instruments made of bone and cane found in the ruins, and in an economy of brilliant balance. They did not rely on one source of sustenance but two. From the arid valleys, they irrigated fields to grow cotton, gourds, and beans, and from the incredibly rich Pacific waters, they harvested vast amounts of fish, particularly anchovies and shellfish. This was the foundation, a dual economy where cotton nets were woven to catch the sea's bounty, creating a sustainable cycle of land and ocean. For nearly 2 millennia, this system supported their peaceful, ceremonial centers. Then, without any sign of invasion, conflict, or a sudden disaster, the great plazas fell silent. The platform mounds were carefully abandoned, not destroyed. It is as if the people simply decided one day to stop maintaining the ritual heartbeat of their world. The prevailing hypothesis points to a change in the very rhythm of the ocean that sustained them. The cold, nutrient-rich Humboldt Current that flows along the Peruvian coast is what creates those spectacular fisheries. Researchers suggest that long-term climatic shifts may have altered this current's pattern or intensity. Perhaps the waters warmed, driving the anchovy schools away or deeper, or maybe the current shifted offshore. If the maritime resource base that provided the protein and the fertilizer for their crops became unreliable, the entire delicate economic balance would have collapsed. Without a crisis to fight or an enemy to blame, the social cohesion centered on those monumental building projects may have simply lost its purpose. The people likely dispersed into smaller, more mobile groups along the coast and into the valleys, adapting to a new reality. Their specific cultural tradition, this first American experiment in centralized ceremonial living, gradually dissolved. Its innovations, however, did not die. They flowed into the cultural tapestry of the region, becoming part of the foundation for all the complex societies that would follow in Peru. The North Chico's disappearance is perhaps the quietest of all, a civilization that did not fall, but whose reason for being together in that specific, grand way was slowly washed away by a change in the sea. They leave us with a haunting question: what happens to a society's grand vision when the environment it so perfectly adapted to simply decides to change the rules? The sea can change its rules, and so can the very earth upon which an empire stands. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, the Hittites forged a kingdom not of myth, but of meticulous law and terrifying military might. For centuries, they were one of the Bronze Age's true superpowers, a rival that could stand toe-to-toe with the pharaohs of Egypt, most famously at the epic Battle of Kadesh. Their power was built on a foundation of innovation and administration. While others used bronze, the Hittites pioneered the large-scale production and use of iron, a harder, more durable metal that gave their weapons and tools a crucial edge. And they did not just wield power, they documented it. In their fortified capital of Hattusa, a sprawling city of massive stone walls and monumental gateways guarded by stone lions and sphinxes, they maintained one of the ancient world's great libraries. Thousands of clay tablets, inscribed in the wedge-shaped script called cuneiform, recorded everything from royal treaties and legal codes to detailed religious rituals and diplomatic correspondence. This was a civilization of profound literacy and bureaucratic order, a complex machine of state. Then, around 1180 before Common Era, the machine was smashed. Hattusa was not merely abandoned, it was violently sacked and burned, the great walls breached, the palaces put to the torch. The destruction was so complete, so final, that the Hittite Empire, as a unified political force, ceased to exist almost overnight. Its disappearance was part of that wider, terrifying phenomenon, the Bronze Age collapse that also consumed the Mycenaeans. But what could bring down such a formidable, organized power? The causes were a catastrophic convergence. External invaders, the mysterious coalition known as the Sea Peoples, were raiding coasts and destabilizing trade routes across the eastern Mediterranean, applying immense pressure on the Hittites' flanks. Simultaneously, migratory tribes from the north and west, perhaps pushed by their own hardships, pressed against the empire's frontiers. Yet external threats alone rarely topple great empires unless they find weakness within. Evidence suggests the Hittite heartland was suffering from severe famine, likely triggered by prolonged drought. A centralized state that cannot feed its people quickly loses legitimacy. This internal crisis may have sparked revolts among subject peoples or power struggles within the royal court itself, fracturing the unity needed to face the mounting external storms. The empire shattered like a dropped clay tablet, but here the story holds a fascinating echo. While the imperial core in Anatolia was extinguished, fragments of Hittite culture persisted for centuries further south. In parts of Syria, smaller so-called Neo-Hittite city-states arose, maintaining elements of Hittite art, architecture, and even royal titles. Yet, crucially, they lost the Hittite language and the cohesive imperial identity. Over generations, they were absorbed into the Aramaic-speaking world, their distinct heritage diluted. For over 3,000 years, the Hittites existed only as a vague name in Egyptian and biblical texts, a phantom empire. Then, in the early 20th century, archaeologists began excavating the burnt ruins of Hattusa. They found the great libraries, the tablets baked hard and preserved by the very fires that destroyed the city. As scholars painstakingly deciphered the cuneiform, an entire lost civilization spoke again, its laws, its conflicts, its daily concerns emerging from the silence. Their vanishing was so absolute that it took modern decipherment to prove they were ever more than a legend, a stark reminder that even the most documented and powerful states are not immune to the perfect storm, and that history itself can be erased, waiting centuries for a key to be found in the ashes. The ashes of Hattusa hold a final, profound question. What do these 20 silent worlds, scattered across continents and millennia, tell us when we listen to them together? Their stories are not just isolated tragedies, but a chorus of warnings and insights, revealing haunting patterns that transcend any single time or place. One recurring villain emerges with chilling clarity: environmental stress. In case after case, from the megadrought that emptied the American cliff dwellings to the disappearing lake that unraveled Tiwanaku, a changing climate was often the silent, relentless force that frayed the first vital threads of a society. A prolonged drought could cripple agriculture, spark famine, and shatter the social contract that held a civilization together. It is a lesson carved not in stone, but in absence, and its relevance to our own era of climatic uncertainty is impossible to ignore. Yet the environment alone rarely delivers the final blow. These cases reveal a second, deeply human pattern: the paradox of social complexity. A highly centralized, specialized society like the Clovis culture or the Minoan maritime network could achieve breathtaking heights, but it often became uniquely vulnerable. When crisis struck, these intricate systems had less flexibility to adapt. A decentralized society might scatter and regroup, but a palace economy or a single source of sustenance, once broken, could bring down an entire civilization. The very structures that created their greatness could become cages when the world changed around them. This brings us to the most important correction these ghosts offer to our imagination. The idea of a civilization vanishing is almost always a simplification, a trick of historical perspective. For the people living through it, the end of their world was rarely a single, dramatic extinction. It was far more often a process, a long, difficult transition. The people of the Indus Valley likely dispersed into smaller villages. The Moche artists and farmers saw their political order collapse, but their descendants carried forward their skills. The Axumites traded imperial glory for a lasting religious and cultural legacy. What we label as disappearance was, for them, often a story of transformation, migration, and assimilation. They did not just die, they changed, and in that change lies their true, enduring presence. These civilizations did not vanish without a trace, they left echoes. The Olmecs provided the cultural template for Mesoamerica. The North Chico's dual economy foreshadowed Andean ingenuity. The spiritual heart of Axum still beats in Ethiopia today. Their legacy challenges us to see history not as a simple series of endings with clear-cut winners and losers, but as a complex, ever-branching web of transitions. A society's political project might dissolve, but its ideas, its bloodlines, and its innovations weave themselves into the fabric of the future, often in ways that are invisible to those who only look for fallen stones and empty cities. The final lesson from the silence, then, is about perception. We must learn to listen not only for what was lost, but for what was carried forward, hidden in plain sight within the world that came after. Their silent stones and empty plazas are not just monuments to the past, they are mirrors held up to our present. The mosaic of these 20 vanished worlds reveals a pattern more compelling than any single mystery. It shows us that human history is not a straight line of progress, but a complex dance with forces far greater than ourselves. These civilizations, in all their diversity, teach us that resilience is not about permanence, but about the wisdom to adapt, and that the ultimate measure of a society may not be how long it lasts, but what it leaves behind in the collective memory of humanity. Their greatest lesson is one of profound connection, a reminder that we are part of an intricate system, bound to our environment, our resources, and to one another. When those bonds are strained or severed, even the mightiest empires can dissolve back into the landscape from which they rose. Yet their stories also carry a quiet hope. They demonstrate the incredible creativity of the human spirit, our capacity to build wonders, to solve impossible problems, and to find meaning in the stars and stones. Their end was rarely an absolute end, but a transformation, a scattering of seeds that would take root in new forms. As we navigate the complexities of our own global civilization, with its own environmental stresses and social challenges, their echoes are a guide. They ask us to consider what we are building our world upon, and what essential parts of ourselves we would choose to carry forward if we ever had to walk away. Which of their lessons speaks most powerfully to you? Is it the peril of overspecialization, the fragility of interconnected systems, or the quiet strength found in cultural adaptation? Share your reflections in the comments below. If these journeys into the deepest shadows of history have captivated you, be sure to subscribe. Our exploration of the past's greatest puzzles is only just beginning.